Limbo needs no introduction. Originally released in 2010 on the Xbox Live Arcade, it quickly became a critical darling and started something of a renaissance almost for indie side-scrollers. Limbo is now available for physical release on the PS4 and Xbox One, along with its spiritual successor, Inside. Almost identical in gameplay and mood, Inside and Limbo use a crisp, high-contrast aesthetic in a 2.5D world with simple and elegant gameplay to tell two very different and rather abstract stories. Despite both opening with a young boy lost and pursued in the woods, they end up in very, very different places. In terms of gameplay, you have three abilities: run, jump, and grab. Nothing more, yet despite the simplicity of the core gameplay, the player input combined with the world around them results in some rather intuitive and ingenious puzzles. If I had to summarise the gameplay in one word, it would be fine, but I don't mean that in a sense of it being underwhelming or underdeveloped. It simply does exactly what it needs to do, and nothing more. Because what makes Limbo and Inside so effective has very little to do with their gameplay. The mood in these games is second to none. These are horror games, don't be mistaken. But also don't be mistaken into thinking that you will be jumping out of your seat, slaying horrible creatures. Limbo and Inside are true horror. Bleak, distressing, unknowable, confusing, crushing horror. Just watching footage of each game out of context with no direct input, it's hard to convey how they really make you feel. So be warned, in order to attempt to explain this, I'm going to spoil one small moment from Limbo. After a narrow escape from a huge pursuing spider, you happen across another child, the only other person you've seen so far. As you approach them, they move. Slightly. There's a sense of elation, almost comfort, something that isn't trying to kill you. Something that is just as vulnerable and alone as you. Another child. But just as you reach them, the ground beneath you collapses and you fall into a pit. The child doesn't follow. The noose around their neck hangs them above you. And you are left to wonder whether this was an inevitability, or whether, indirectly or not, they died because of you. A child. I love horror. Most of my time is taken up by horror films and games, and as such I have an ever-increasing threshold for these sorts of things. With that said, Limbo, specifically in this moment, got me. I had to stop playing for the moment. It's easy to make the death of a child shocking. Limbo, by contrast, demonstrates a level of skill with its art direction, mood, pacing, all contextualized to create something so poetically bleak. Without being gratuitous or exploitative, Limbo made me feel sick. And I applaud it for that. Inside suffers somewhat from the unfortunate and unavoidable reality of having to have followed Limbo. It doesn't have a moment that I recall quite as gut-punching, but with that said, I don't want to discredit it, because Inside absolutely excels at showing the absolute hopeless degradation of the situation. It's best played in one sitting, because the distinction between how you feel when you start the game compared with when you finish it is something to marvel at. Limbo and Inside, both are a masterclass in how to create a world so small yet so large and imposing. How to create some of the most uncomfortable scenarios I've ever had to endure without devolving into exploitation. They are distressing, they are crushing, they are uncomfortable to suffer through, which is why they contained some of the most memorable horror moments that I've ever experienced.